Hello everyone, my name is Brad Tallis from Autodesk and welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. On the keyboard with me is my buddy Angelo, so as we're going through, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them out there. And stay tuned for next week. We're actually going to switch roles. Angelo is going to do a live stream on a CAM topic. We've been getting a lot of requests for more CAM live streams. So Angelo stepped up and he's going to do one on the setup menu, going through in depth the setup menu. So make sure you attend next week and I'll be his wingman. So looking forward to that. Today we're going to continue on from where we left off last time, where we created this part 4. I couldn't really think of a name for it or whatever. And as a little teaser at the very, very end, I turned on this basket part and I showed that the part 4 is actually sticks up above it. And this happens a lot in design where you're kind of going through and you're designing things and then something needs to change. So what I want to do in this case is I actually want to change the height of the overall part. And let me just do this really quick. I'm going to dive in. Also, really quick, I forgot to mention this. I put my outline and the drawings in the description of the video, so please feel free to download those later and go through at your own time and your own pace. So I'm going to be referencing that outline and that drawing. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to see everything, and so I've got a couple parts turned on, I've got a couple parts turned off. You can kind of see that in my structure browser. And I like to show tips and tricks that'll help speed up your design process. Instead of turning them on here, I'm going to right mouse click at the top level, and you'll see that we have show all components and show all bodies. So I'm going to say show all components, and you'll notice that some turned on. So it turned on all of the components, but for example, in this base, I've got multiple bodies, okay? So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to say show all components, and then I'm going to come back and say show all bodies. And that basically turns on everything that might have been turned off. And so we can see the overall kind of design of this pencil sharpener. I'm going to make sure my top level assembly is active, and notice my timeline, okay? And I'm going to scrub through here. Notice how lengthy and how complex our timeline is. That's because we've done quite a bit of work in the last 4 sessions. Now the good news is, notice that there's no errors or warnings in our timeline. So that's pretty rare, but I'm happy about that. So we're going to do some stuff that's going to cause some issues with the timeline. So don't fret. We're going to see some issues happen and then how we're going to go about fixing those. Okay. Another thing I like to do, especially with this timeline, I like to go under the inspect menu and toggle this component color cycling. I'm going to toggle that on, and you'll notice that it kind of colors our parts some different colors. And as we scrub through the timeline, we can see that pretty much all of this first stuff has to do with the blue part, which are these right here. And then as I continue on, we can see some orange stuff going on, and that's kind of this orange part right there. And I keep scrubbing, and here you can see we've got, for example, this light blue part. And then interspersed, there's a couple little green parts and stuff like that. We haven't really done much with this part yet, so that's why you don't see a lot of green parts in here. So that color component cycling is actually a really useful tool, and you can toggle that on or off. It's not physically changing the colors of your part. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to know the distance between these two faces. So I'm going to click on the ruler icon, and here's another tip. I help a lot of customers, and I always say, oh, let's do a measurement, and they always click on inspect and then come down to measure. Well, all you have to do is click on this icon right here, and it takes you right into the measure command. So you don't have to go into this pull down and click the measure there. Or you can use the I key, the I for inspect. So, okay, and so I'm going to click on that face there, and I'm going to click on that face there. And it tells me the distance is 0.145. And you'll also notice as I hover over this result, it says click to copy into the clipboard. And I highly recommend that you do this. Instead of typing in 0.145, this is being displayed at, basically 3 decimal places of precision. So it could be 0.145394 or something like that. And it's going to round to 0.145. But you might want the exact number. So by clicking on that, it's going to grab the exact number, even if it's 6 decimal places or 12 decimal places. So go ahead and click to copy that into the clipboard. Okay. So I now know that measurement. Now here's where the fun part's going to come. We're going to go to the very first sketch we started with a long time ago. I'm going to go ahead and edit that sketch. And this is the sketch, kind of the skeleton that defined the overall size of this pencil sharpener. And you can see we made it 6.5 inches tall. Well, I want to make this a little bit taller by a very specific number. So I'm going to double click on this dimension, and then I can click after it, hit the plus key, and then I'm going to paste, Control V, and you can see that it grabbed that number that we had copied out of the measurement, and it's going to paste it into this dimension. So watch what happens when I hit enter here. You saw my sketch updated. It went up just a little bit. In fact, let me undo. You can kind of see that. I'll redo. Because my sketch was fully defined, I knew how this thing was going to react, and it lengthened this nice little spline for us and made the part a little bit taller. Okay. Now, when I say finish sketch, watch what happens. So we've got a lot of parts and components, and our timeline is pretty complex. So you can see that it's computing a lot of stuff. So we changed the recipe at the very, very beginning, and now it's going through and confirming that the rest of this recipe is going to work. So you can kind of see it's computing fillets and embosses and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes making an early change like this can take a little bit of time to compute. And I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to speed some of that stuff up. So this first time it might take 20, 30 seconds to compute. Okay, now we get our result. And you can see that sure enough, it still looks like a pencil sharpener. It now goes to the very top of the part, but for the eagle eye ones of you guys, you can see that there's 2 red issues in our timeline. Yellow is a warning, like, oh, I lost a reference that you projected to, but red says, hey, something failed. Okay, so I'm going to hover over this first one, and we can see that the feature is called a replace face, and it's on the base component. Okay, so I'm going to right click on this base component over here, and let's just isolate it, which means it's going to turn off all of the other stuff and only show the stuff that has to do with this base component. Okay, makes things a little bit simpler. Then what I'm going to do is right click on this errored thing and say roll the history marker here. And watch what this does. It basically turns off all of these other features. They haven't happened in time yet, and so it's only going to calculate these features if I make a change. It's going to calculate to this marker right here. So this is one of those tips that will really help speed up things, because all I'm really concerned about is what's going on here. I don't care what's going on down here yet. We will, but not right now. Okay. So I'm going to hover over this guy, and it shows me it's the component base, but it doesn't really tell me, which body it is. So one of the other tips that I like to do is I like to go maybe to the step right before it, and you'll notice that's a pattern on a path, and I can see it highlighting a couple features. And if I look at that, I can see that that is on this part right here. So I'm just going to expand this open. And that is the base with the floor. I can see as I'm kind of hovering over it how it highlights in my browser over here. So let's turn off the part that we don't need, the base, and we're going to work on this base with a floor. As I zoom up on this, I can already kind of see what the issue is. You kind of see these little V's in here and stuff like that, but that's just because I kind of know what's going on here. I'm going to right click on this error message and say review warning. Now it just says compute failed. Well, thank you. If I expand this open, it tends to give you some more information. So it says the faces could not be replaced. Try changing the face selections. So this is a really good tip. It's kind of telling you what it thinks needs to happen. Okay. So it says something about face selection. So I'm going to go ahead and now right click on this and say edit features. And what we can see here is it says 3 source faces, which kind of makes sense. That's those 3 faces that were there. But then it says target faces 3 selected. Okay. Now, you'll notice something interesting. As I'm editing this, it looks like it fixed the problem. And this is one of the cool things with Fusion. You're actually going to see this multiple times today. Sometimes just editing the feature allows Fusion to figure out what it needs to do. And it did. It figured out what it needed to do. So I actually don't have to do anything, but I'm going to pretend that this didn't happen and it's still an error message, and I'm going to walk you through that. So the thing that I find interesting is, sure enough, I selected those 3 faces originally, and then I said I want those to match this one curved surface right here. Okay, but you'll notice it says 3. For whatever reason, changing the shape of the part, it kind of grabbed all 3 faces instead of just the one that I want selected. So I'm going to remove that. And now we're kind of back to where those little grooves are in there. Okay, so those are my source faces, and those look good. Those are the 3 selected faces right here. And now I'm just going to reselect my target face. So I'm going to click on this curved face here, and we can see that now it matches that curved face. I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and we're going to hope that that red goes away. And sure enough, it did. We solved the issue. We kind of fixed what it was complaining about. And I think what it was complaining about was it was grabbing all 3 of these faces. That's why there was 3 faces selected. I can't get that guy right there. Oops, sorry. So it had all 3 of those faces, when in reality we just want 1. Okay, so we fixed it very easily. Now, a lot of times you're going to have errors in sketches, errors in like patterns and stuff like that. A lot of times you'll go into that sketch and the warning will say, a lost reference, reselect an edge or something like that. And that's all you have to do. Click on an edge. It now says, okay, I'm going to reference that edge, and it'll move forward. So just take a look at what the warning message is saying. Okay, now we're right here in time. I'm going to fast forward 1 step, and I'm going to watch what happens. Okay, so this is where we ended up splitting that face. I'll step forward 1 more step and confirm that sure enough the change that we made back here seems to be working. Okay, now we have this mirror. I'm going to step forward 1 more step, and notice it's computing. And because we fixed the issue back here, it was able to complete the mirror. So I don't even have to do anything to fix that error message. By fixing the first error message, it fixed the second one. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to the end of our timeline here, just to make sure that everything solves correctly and we don't have any other issues. And again, this might take a couple seconds to calculate or whatever. So you can see it's computing fillets and embosses and all that kind of stuff. So, okay. And we can see that those features inside this part finished. Let's just scrub through really quick, and we don't see any errors in our timeline. Okay, so quick review. We went way back in time. We made a design change. What I figured was a simple design change. We just kind of changed a height of something, but it caused downstream issues. And so we focused on one of those downstream issues. We resolved it, and it actually ended up resolving the other issue, the mirror feature that had an error. So just kind of walk through your timeline. If you get any warnings or any errors, just take a look at what it's telling you and figure out what you need to do to resolve that. Okay, let's jump back in here. So what we're actually working on today is, sorry, I'll go back to the camera, is this part here, which I'm calling the basket, and then also this cap that screws onto this basket. So we're going to be focusing on both of these parts today. Okay, so let's unisolate everything. So I'm going to right mouse click on the top level, and notice I can say unisolate all, because remember I isolated the base. So I'm going to say unisolate all, and it's going to turn all of my components back on. If my bodies all don't show up, I can say show all bodies, and then now we're back to this result here. Okay, now I want to focus, since we fixed this part, now I want to focus on that part by itself. So I'm going to activate the basket, and to simplify things, I'm going to go ahead and isolate it so it's all the other parts are turned off. Okay. So I need to create a hole, and let me just jump to the drawing real quick so you can kind of see what's going on here. We're basically creating a couple holes that go through the bottom of this part. One that's 1.35 in diameter and one that's 1.88 in diameter. And you can see the different heights in the drawing. Well, if I use the hole command, it's going to ask for a location, and you'll notice there's no point on this face, and depending on where I click, I'm going to get different results. It's going to kind of wrap, around. Let me go ahead and click here, for example, so you can kind of see how it's at a funky angle depending on where we click on this face. So I need to be very precise. I want to catch the exact center of this weird shape. Okay. And to do that, we're going to use some construction geometry. Now there's a neat one in here called plane tangent to face at a point. Okay, so I want my plane to be tangent to this face, and I'm going to pick a very specific point. So check this out. I'm going to say plane tangent to face, so it's asking what is the face. I'm going to go ahead, in fact, I'll click over here somewhere just to show you it doesn't matter. Now it's asking for a point. Well, I don't have any points that I can click. However, I have this origin down here. So I can click on this point right here, and notice what it did. It created a plane tangent to that face right at the center of it. In fact, if we kind of look at it like so, my origin goes away, but it's right in the center of that cone, basically. So I'll go ahead and say OK, and I now have a plane that's tangent to that funky curved surface. Then I can use this plane to create a sketch. And notice my 0, 0. In fact, you can kind of see it sort of highlights right there. So I'm going to create a point, something that I can physically click on. So I'm going to say point. I'll get near, let me zoom up so you can kind of see it's going to snap to that point right there. If I rotate around, sure enough, you can kind of see that dark spot. I'll say finish sketch, and I now have a point on that surface that's exactly in the center of it. And now we can use that point to create the hole. So let's try that again. I'm going to say hole. If I get near this point right here, you can kind of see how it highlights. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and it's going to use that point, and we can see that the hole is going in the correct direction. It's right in the center of it. So sometimes you might have to create construction geometry like planes or axes or anything like that to help you position things correctly. Okay, so I'm gonna keep this simple. Instead of creating a complex profile, I'm gonna just use the hole command. I know the first hole is 1.88 in diameter, and it needs to go 0.815 according to the drawing. So you can kind of see how it's actually on a curved surface, but it's going to cut into there. I also want to make sure that my drill point is set to flat. I don't want the drill point in there. So we're going to set that to flat. I'll say OK, and I now have a hole, almost like a counterboard hole in there. I'm going to do the exact same thing again for the smaller hole. So we just did this larger one right here. There's the depth. Now we have the 1.35 at a depth of 1.15. So I'll go ahead and use the hole command again. Now it's asking for a point. I'm going to go ahead and expand open my basket, expand open my sketches, and let's turn that sketch back on. And now you can see that that point reappeared. So I can click on that point, and you'll notice I get an error message, no target body. Well, that's because it's remembering the exact same dimensions that I used previously, and so it's basically saying I'm cutting air, so there's nothing to cut. Well, once we come in here and change some things, so I'm going to say 1.35 for the diameter. And then for the depth, we'll do the 1.15. And now you'll see it has something to cut, and it's not going to error out. And again, basically a simple hole with a flat drill point. I'll say OK. And if we kind of look at the camera, you can kind of see, I'm getting some reflection from my light, I apologize. You can kind of see the two depths of those holes in there. Okay, so that's what we're doing. I don't know if you saw in the camera view, but they're also filleted. So I'm going to do the fillet command. Now I typically click on an edge and say fillet, but check this out. I'm going to say fillet, and notice it says edges, faces, or features. Well, I'm going to click on the first hole feature. So I'm going to click right there, and you'll notice it selected a bunch of stuff. And now when I come in and type in my radius of 0.08, look what it did. It actually filleted all of the edges that have to do with this first hole. You'll notice it didn't do anything with the second hole. Okay, so instead of having to manually click 3 edges, I can just come in here and select that whole feature, and it will grab all of the edges that has to do with that whole feature. So it's a really quick way of selecting lots of stuff. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Okay, the next thing I want to do is, again, I kind of show the camera here. I want to keep a section of this. So you can kind of see we're modeling the whole thing. Now I want to take a section of that off. And so we're going to do that by splitting this body, okay? But I need to measure that correctly. So I'm going to do an offset plane, and I'm going to just click on this top face. Okay. Right now you'll notice it's set to 0. I'm going to start to drag it down, and I can see that's going in the negative direction. So I'm going to say minus 0.4, 0.4. You kind of see how it jumps down to that dimension. I'll say OK. We'll use the split body command. What's the body to split? Now watch what happens here. We're dealing with the basket component, and we have just this body called basket. So what's the body to split? This green part. What's my splitting tool? This guy here. And I'm going to say OK. And now you'll notice that we have two bodies in this component. Well, I want this cap to be its own component. So I'm going to just right click on it and say create components from bodies. Now you'll notice I only have one body now, but I have this new component that's kind of underneath the basket. Okay, so it did exactly what I told it to. This was my active component. I told it to convert the body to a component, which it did, but I now want this to be up here. Okay, so I'm going to rename this guy. I'm just going to call it basket cap. Okay, then I'm just going to drag and drop onto my top level, and you'll notice it pulled it out of this component and made its own individual component. In fact, you can kind of see how it's ghosted out because it's not the active component right now. Okay, so that's a kind of a cool way. You can use an existing component, and if you split it, you can create other components from that if necessary. Okay, so we're going to come back to the cap here in just a little bit. In fact, I'm going to turn that guy off, and I'm going to turn off my construction so it's not in the way, and maybe my sketches. Okay, now I want to give it some shelled thickness. Right now it's a solid. In fact, if I turn on my section, I don't know if I have one. Yeah, we can see that that's a solid body with some holes in it. Okay, so we're going to use the shell command. So I'll say shell. I'm going to click on this top face, and I'm also going to select this inside face here. I'll start to drag so you can kind of see what's going on, and we're now shelling this part out. We can see down inside of it, and we can see all the way through it because we opened it up in the top and we opened it up on the bottom. And I was actually pretty close, 0.08 for the wall thickness, and we're going to make it go to the inside. We don't want the overall outside to get thicker. We want the inside direction. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And now if we look at that section view, we can see that sure enough, we've got even wall thickness all the way around. Hopefully this is making sense. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a really small fillet to the top and bottom edge. It's 0.01, something like that. You can see pretty small fillet there. I'm kind of curious what this thing's going to look like, so I'm going to turn off my component color cycling, and this is going to be a transparent part. So let's go into our appearance. So I go to modify appearance, and you can see I've already been in here, so I'm going to minimize some of this stuff so you can kind of see how I got here. Okay, so here's our appearances, and I can come in here, and obviously it's going to be some kind of a plastic, so I'm going to expand plastic. And you can see we've got a bunch of different kinds in here: opaque, and then you can see textured, translucent, and transparent. So I'm going to expand open transparent, and we can see different colored acrylics. polycarbonate, and then here's a polycarbonate clear. And that's kind of what this material is made out of. So I'm going to drag and drop that onto my part, and we can see that now you can sort of see through it. It's kind of a clear material. Now, if you want to, you could come in here and edit that material and change its color a little bit so it's not quite so see-through or whatever. So we could do something like this, for example. And I'll go ahead and do that for now, just so we can kind of see that it's a transparent part, but you can still see that it's an actual object. Okay? Cool. Okay, so I'm pretty much done with the basket. So now I want to work on the basket cap. So I'm going to turn it on, I'm going to activate it. And actually here's something kind of cool. Notice the basket is active right now. Here's just the features that we use to create this basket, right? This is, again, reason why I really like using components. It really simplifies our design. In fact, watch what happens when we go to basket cap. We basically have one little feature in here, which is, hey, we converted it from a body to a component. And watch what happens to our timeline as we start working on this cap. Okay, so we kind of split this part off, and I want to make sure that that's active, which it is. I like to open up my bodies and kind of see what's going on there if things change. Again, just using the, let me jump to the drawing really quick. Now this is a multi-sheet drawing, so you'll notice the first page has to do with the basket, the second page has to do with the cap. You can kind of see I created a couple images here. We're going to create this little thread that's in here, and you can kind of see the overall shape kind of in a section view. So I'm just using these dimensions as we're going through. So I can see the very first thing I'm going to do is probably add this 0.1 radius on the top. So kind of defining the shape of the part before I shell it out. So let's just do 0.1. I'll say OK. And then according to the drawing, you can see there's a fairly large hole that goes through it. So again, I could draw a sketch. I could draw a profile. I could, then extrude that through multiple steps. Why not just use the hole command? It's one feature. You'll notice I can click on this face and I'm going to get a weird result because it's remembering my last size. But as I start to drag this blue dot, you'll notice there's a white dot kind of in the center, and all I have to do is get near it and it's going to snap right to that. Okay? And you can see kind of what it's doing. It's basically creating a hole through here. All I have to do now is specify the diameter. So 1.25. We kind of see it updates a little bit. The other thing is I like to make sure it's going the correct depth. So instead of distance, I'm going to just say go to all, or go through all, I should say. It's a simple hole. That's it. So one feature in my timeline. I didn't have a sketch. I didn't have an extrude. I didn't have any of that. So if it's a simple shape like this, you could use the hole command. Okay, looking underneath, I'm going to now shell this part out. And it won't make too much sense until you kind of see what's going on here. But I'm going to say shell. And as I start to drag, we can kind of visually see what's happening here, right? So we're opening this face. You can kind of see how we're creating this thin plastic cap. But it's actually fairly thick. So I'm going to say 0.125. And as I do that, a lot of the stuff goes away. But we're going to make some changes here, and you're going to see what's going to happen. But it's actually shelling this part out. In fact, if we turn on our analysis again, we can kind of see what it's doing. Okay. Okay. Let me jump back into here real quick. Okay. So looking at the drawing, we can kind of see that there is this little notch right here. Okay. And we can see that that notch is 0.1 in length. So I'm going to basically extend our cap. So it's kind of hard to tell, but right where this line is right here, this is the thickness of our cap. And we're going to make some changes to make it even taller. So I'm going to click on this outside face. Let me show you what I mean by this, actually. Let me turn the basket on. You can see that it's flush with the basket. Well, we're going to use this basket to help us define how this cap is going to fit on there. So I need to add a little bit of extra material. So I'm going to click on that face and say press pull. And watch what happens when I pull on this. You can see how it's extending that face. It's continuing this angle, it's continuing this shell, all that kind of stuff. And I just need to add 0.1 of material to it. Now let's turn the basket back on and you can see that they're overlapping a little bit. Okay. Well, we're going to use that to our advantage. So I'm just going to come in here and do a combine. Okay. Our target is what we want to change. So I want to basically remove some material from here. So I'm going to say the target is the cap. The tool is going to be our basket, this clear part. Now you'll notice some weird stuff happen. It says, oh, you want to join those together? No, I don't. I want to cut those apart. And notice when I change it to cut, I get a nice preview of what that's going to look like. Okay. However, I don't want to lose the basket component. So I'm going to say, let's keep that tool. So we're going to use the basket and let's keep it. Don't get rid of it. If I had left this unchecked, it would actually use the tool and then throw it away. It doesn't need it anymore. So I do want to make sure that we're keeping the tools. And I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. Let's turn off the basket. And you'll notice by using that, we've now created this little recess that will fit into this basket part. Okay. Now, if you look really closely, I'm going to zoom up here. There's this weird edge right here, and that's because there's actually a fillet on the basket. Okay, and it did exactly what we told it to. We told it to cut that material away, so it left that little bit of material that would wrap around that fillet. I could get rid of this a couple different ways. I could select those faces and delete them, or I actually want to fillet this edge. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that edge and say fillet. And let's just do a small fillet, like 0.01, and you can see that sure enough, it basically removed the issue automatically for me. Okay? By adding a fillet on there, it basically destroyed that extra little flange or whatever you want to call it. So that was a quick way of doing it. I'll say okay, and I didn't have to have any delete features in my timeline. Okay, the next thing I want to do, so we've just created this right here, and there's that 0.01 fillet we just created. The next thing I want to do is bring this area down 0.35. So just like we did before, I'll click on this face here, say press pull. I'm going to start to drag, and then I can come in here and type in 0.35. And we just brought that face from where it was down to 0.35. I can turn on the basket, kind of take a look at what that looks like. It's looking pretty good. Okay. Okay. What I want to do next is let me bring the drawing up here. There are these little grooves right here that basically rotate in and get captured by you don't see it. Oh, it's on the other part. Sorry, it's not on this drawing. I'll show you in the 3D model. I'm going to turn on this part 4. And let's just turn off the basket cap real quick. So there's these little L-shape threads that we kind of created last time. And now we want to be able to put the cap down and then rotate it and get captured by these L-shaped threads. Now, I'm not sure the way I'm going to show you is the best way or the only way or whatever. It's just kind of what I came up with. If you can think of a different way, more power to you. I'd love to see what you did. So I'm going to turn the basket cap back on. And what we're going to do is, actually I lied. I'm going to turn that guy off. Make sure part 4 is turned on. Okay. I want to grab some information from this part. So just like before, I'm going to create an offset plane. And I'm going to click on this bottom face of this line here. Okay, and notice I get a warning. It says the object you're creating is not visible. We'll get to that here in a second. But basically what I want to do is I want to know where in space this thread is. And then we're going to create some stuff off of that. So I'm basically grabbing the bottom of this thread. And you'll notice it was complaining that it's not visible. And that's because my basket cap is my active component. So anything I'm doing is happening in this component, but it's not visible. And so that's what it was complaining about. As soon as I make that visible, now it's able to display that plane. So if you ever see that warning, that's what's going on. The object you're creating is not visible. We have it turned off. And so anything underneath that is also not visible, including construction geometry, sketches, bodies, etc. Okay? Okay, so I just created a plane that's right at the bottom of that thread right there. Then we're going to grab some information. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. I'm going to obviously use the project command. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sketch on this face, or on this plane, I should say. I'm going to rotate 3-dimensionally so you can kind of see what's going on. So our plane is right there at the bottom of that thread. Okay. Then I'm going to do a project intersect. Okay. Instead of having to click on features and stuff like that, intersect kind of slices through right where that plane is. So I'm going to say intersect, and then watch what happens. You'll notice I'm getting near this 3-dimensional face right here, and you can see that it's projecting it onto that plane. So no matter how tall this face is, it's projecting that information onto our plane right here. Okay. I also want to project, let me go ahead and turn on the basket. I'm going to project intersect. Let me go project intersect. This face here also. I'll say OK. You can kind of see some purple geometry going on. So now I'm going to turn off some of these parts to kind of show you what's going on. So we projected that line there, and we projected this line here. Now, the reason it didn't go all the way around is because of that thread. Let me turn this guy on here. So you can kind of see it stopped there and didn't project all the way across because this face actually stops right here. But I now have some information that is useful to me. Okay. I'm also going to project some of this thread. So I'll come in here and say project. And instead of doing the intersect, this time I'm going to physically click on some important things. And again, it's kind of hard to see. Hopefully you can see what's going on here. I want to know where this face is, because that's basically where the thread stops. So I'm going to click on that face. I kind of want to know where this face is, because that's where the top of that L is. And maybe just for fun, I'll project this angled face here. and this end face here. And you can kind of see the results that we're getting. Again, it's kind of hard to see, but it's projecting those onto that plane. I'll go ahead and say OK. And you'll notice I now have a couple dots that's kind of defining where this L-shaped thread is. And I want to use that information. So that's why I spent the time to project that geometry. Let's kind of take a look at it from the top. And I'm going to turn off some of this geometry. So what I know is basically these dots right here have to do with that face right here. I'm kind of highlighting right there. So those are important dots right there. I'm going to use those to help me with my design. Okay, so I'm going to draw a line from the center right here, and I'm going to have a couple different methods here. If I try and go to this edge here, you can kind of see that it's going through those dots, but am I guaranteed that it is? That makes me a little bit nervous. Now I want to get to this outside edge, but I'm going to much rather click on a point. I'm going to grab this point so I know that it's physically going through that point. But then I can come in here and say extend. I'll hover over that line and it's going to extend that line to the next boundary, which is this outside circle. Okay, so that's good. Then I want a line 90 degrees from this. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'll say line. I'm going to come over here and you can kind of see it's going to capture or catch to this outside edge, which I want, but you don't see any 90 degree or anything like that. So I'm going to purposely over exaggerate and click right there. And then I can come in and say perpendicular, that line and that line, and you can see it's now perpendicular with it. So I know that that's exactly 90 degrees. Okay. Now, what I'm concerned about is I want this profile in here, and you'll notice that I don't have a really good profile or a closed profile or anything like that. So I'm going to draw a selection box around everything and turn it to construction geometry. Then I might click on the lines I don't want to be construction geometry, which are these two here, and I'll turn those off. I want those to be actual object lines. But now I have geometry I can reference. So for example, I could say, let's create a circle from here to here. And you'll notice it's going to kind of fill in all of this weird area. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on that guy. And then I'll do a circle from here to here, or to this point here, doesn't really matter. And now you'll notice, how come I should have a valid profile that goes all the way across. I must not over here. So let me redo that line real quick. And I do not. Interesting. Not 100% sure what's going on there, so let's see if we can figure this out. Let me go to the top view. So it doesn't think that this is closed for whatever reason. So let's just redraw those guys. No, interesting. Let me confirm. I would do an extend to make sure that everything is extended. Now I see that some constraints were removed or whatever. And there we go. Okay, interesting. So what it looks like, let me undo. I'm going to undo back a little bit. Notice that when I came in here and said extend, you don't see it kind of shoot off into space. I'm just going to click on that, and it says constraints and or dimensions were removed during this operation, but then you'll notice that a coincident constraint showed up. So it's basically proving to me that that point is on that circle. And then I'll just confirm the same thing over here. I'll click on that guy, and it doesn't look like it did anything there, but now we can see that that is the profile that I want. Okay, so I know you guys love it when I trip and fall and try and recover, so hopefully the little tip there of, okay, let me confirm that my line totally touches this circle. And again, this is kind of why I captured to that point and then said extend, because I'm not guaranteed that we're in line with anything or whatever. So make sure that the software is doing the work for you instead of making assumptions. Okay, so I now have the profile that I want. So I'm going to say finish sketch. We'll turn the basket cap back on. We'll go ahead and extrude this guy. And again, the thickness, according to the drawing, is 0.05. I don't want it to cut, I want it to join, so I'm going to say join. I'll say OK. And we can see that that is all one body. I can also rename this. It's called basket. I'll call it basket cap. Okay. Just to kind of keep things making more sense. Now I want to fillet this edge, but I don't know what size to fillet it. So check this out. I'm going to say fillet. Then if I click this little down arrow, I can say measure. And what this allows me to do is I'm going to click on this edge, and it's going to measure that edge and create the fillet accordingly. So I can do the same thing over here, and you can see how it's going to create a fillet. So it knows what that depth is by using that measure command. So let me do that one more time just so you can kind of see what's going on there. I'll say fillet, click on that edge, and it's asking for a size, right? I don't know what size, but I want it to be whatever length that edge is. So I'm going to measure that edge, and it's going to figure it out. And sure enough, it's 0.06. I'll go ahead and do that edge there. We'll say OK. And now we don't have any sharp edges for the thing to catch on. Okay, now I need another one of these over here. And actually, this is kind of funny. In one of my live streams, I did something where actually it was on the last live stream where I had that L-shaped thread and I tried to mirror it and all that kind of stuff. So I ended up doing an emboss with a more complex sketch, and people were like, well, couldn't you have just drawn one and done a circular pattern? And yes, you guys are absolutely correct. That was a method. In fact, I think Ekram was one of them that mentioned that, and I could have used a pattern, absolutely. I was trying to show different methods, you know, how the emboss can go all the way around a circular or cylindrical surface. So absolutely use the pattern command when you can, and that's what I'm going to do in this case here. So I'll come in here and say pattern, circular pattern. You know my favorite is features, not faces, but features. And I'm going to pattern the extrude feature and the fillet feature. What's my axis? I'll just click on this cylinder here. Now by default, it wants to do 3. You can kind of see the preview there and there. I'm just going to crank this down to 2, and it's almost like we're doing a mirror. I'll say OK, and we now have the thread, what I'm calling the thread, on both sides. Okay, almost done here. The last thing, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see it in the section view. There's a little bit of a lip right here. 0.03 thickness with a diameter of 1.13. So I am going to use a sketch to do this. I'll just create a sketch on this top face. Create a circle from the center, and the diameter is the off the drawing, it's 1.13. Well, check this out. I'm going to turn on, I want to use this part here. I basically want it to match that surface right there. So let's go ahead and project that edge. So I'm just going to click on that face, and you can see how it created a projection here. And I'll turn that part off so you can kind of see what it did. Now you'll notice lots of little dots and stuff like that on here, and that's because of the L-shaped thread, etc. I'm going to turn this to a construction geometry, okay? Mainly because all of these dots, it could mean that it's not tangent or whatever. I want a nice, perfect, smooth circle. So I'm going to use this and then come in and create a circle, like so. Okay. What that's going to do is give me a nice smooth surface. I'll extrude down the minus 0.03. I want to join that together. I'll say OK. And you can see we just kind of added that little bit of a lip there. And what that's going to do is when we have this part on here, you can kind of see it just kind of fills in, keeps it from like the pencil getting shoved down in there or something like that. So it just adds a little bit of coverage right there. Okay, that is actually it for the cap. So I'm going to hit A for appearance again. I'm going to drag this polycarbonate onto that part there. Okay. We can kind of see how this thread slides right underneath that L-shaped thread right there. And just for fun, let's kind of take a look at it from the top view. You know, maybe a little bit more isometric. I'm going to move this part, and let's do a rotate around the axis. And we should be able to see that thread. As I rotate this around, we can see, sure enough, that that thread is rotating, and we have clearance past that L and clearance before we hit that L over there. So you would basically drop this cap down and then rotate it into place, and that's how it gets held into place. And we used the information from this other part to help us design the cap. Again, just for fun, I'll go ahead and let's just turn on the basket like so. We can kind of see what we worked on today. If you jump over into the render workspace, you can simulate what this is going to look like. You can see the lights reflecting off the plastic. If I go ahead and do an in-canvas render, I have a really dark environment. Let me go ahead and change that real quick. So I like to use HDRI backgrounds, so you can see I'm using this colorful studio, but you can see it's really, really dark. So I'm going to replace it with another HDRI that is not so dark. So let's just do maybe like this cafeteria. I'll say okay, and you'll see that the render will update and it'll be a little bit lighter. And these are fairly large HDRI, so it takes a moment for it to refresh, but you can kind of see it's much lighter background, and so it's going to change what my plastic looks like. But you can kind of get, you know, the reflections and you know, nice results. In fact, you can see I did the cap here earlier, just the cap. Again, I'm pushing a lot of computer processing, so it's taking a while to do some of this stuff. I should probably stop the render. But yeah, you can kind of see, you know, what the plastic would look like with refractions and reflections and all that kind of stuff. So, so anyways, if you want to play around with rendering, I'm not going to spend much more time here, but you kind of see you can tell it's a shelled out part and the things screw together and how what that looks like. So, so with that, oops, I want to thank everybody for attending. Hopefully you learned some new tips and tricks. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning, next week we're going to take a pause from this, and Angelo is going to be doing a cam live stream. We're going to try and get him doing more of these cam live streams because we know it's a very popular topic, and he's brilliant with cam. So he's the one to be teaching this, not me. So we're going to switch seats, and he's going to do it next week. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and have fun fusioning. Thank you.